8 years now that the Jazz Music Cam is on. 8 years ago today, in fact 8 years ago at this very moment, I was kicking off, debuting the first ever edition of the Hard Started Radio Network on blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. Yeah, brand new show. I mean, Blog Talk Radio had only started up a few months before that. You know what else had started up about a few months before that? The political pistachio radio revolution, as it happens. And now it's kind of like what Gowron said to Captain Sisko. Just think of it. 5 years ago, nobody had ever heard of Deep Space Nine. Now all our hopes rest here. The way fortune may take us, no man may know. That's my best Gowron impression. And, you know, it's the same thing with the political pistachio radio revolution that is now Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs on KMET 1490 AM Smart Talk Radio for the Southern California Inland Empire area. That is, of course, for now. Ultimately, to be a nationally syndicated radio program, we're convinced of it. We have faith. It's a question of when, and it's always a question of when. We need capital, we need venture capital, we need advertisers, we need sponsors, we need people to put some money into this puppy so we can start generating the money out of this puppy. At least enough to provide a modest living. Yeah, I'd certainly settle for that. But that was only 3 months before the debut of the Hard Started Radio Network. Now, 8 years ago, today was the first show, and now here we are 8 years later. And I'll tell you what, if you had told me on May the 26th, 2007, May the 26th, 2007, everything that was going to unfold in the ensuing 8 years, I think I might have just jumped off a cliff and been done with it. No, I kid. But I'll tell you what, it would have been a foreboding that would have come over me. Hey, May the 26th, 2007, I hadn't even been at that day job for even 4 years. No, I take it back. I just passed my 4-year anniversary there about 12 days earlier. So I hadn't even gotten through half of my run at my last permanent job in accounting. Yeah, my last permanent job in accounting. Yeah, there's a double entendre I could live without. So, you know, all the things that have happened since then, oh my goodness. Almost lost that job in 2009. Actually, I didn't almost lose it, but I was convinced I was going to. Oh, and gee, what else? The falling into a coma of the old American Republic in the first Tuesday in November 2008. And then the death of the old American Republic on November the 6th, 2012. And then the death of my career on August 29th, 2013. And then waiting around ever since for the next career to get off the ground. That's where all you venture capitalists and sponsors and advertisers come in. And stations of the future political pistachio radio network. which KMET 1490 AM Smart Talk Radio is the flag, or will be the flagship station. And our show, Constitutional Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs, the what was once the Political Pistachio Radio Revolution, will be the flagship program of KMET 1490 AM Smart Talk Radio. We are very grateful and overjoyed to be with them. They are glad and happy to have us. We're going places together. We just got to get there sooner. We got to get there soon enough to suit me. That's what we got to do. That's got to be the overriding priority. How soon does Jasmius want it? That's really what matters. How soon does Jasmius want it? What Jasmius wants is what's the overriding priority. Gosh, just once in my life, I wish that were actually the case. And if it was going to be the case on something, I would want it to be the case on this. You know, start the I don't know what you want to call it, paychecks, royalty checks, regular payments, annuity. I don't care what you want to call it. Yeah, not huge. It doesn't have to be huge. Just enough to pay the bills. You know. Because right now my retirement nest egg is paying the bills, and my retirement nest egg is not being replenished. Or, actually I haven't dipped into it yet, but I will. I actually will. I'll have to start dipping into my savings by the end of this year. Which ought to indicate to you either the spectacular results of my German inbred and ingrained frugality, or how good I am, how good my family and I are at living within our means. We're not living within our means right now because there's only, the floor is still above what our means actually are. But then, if we lived within those means, we'd be living in a no parking zone. So. And eating out of dumpsters, so we're not quite to that point yet. But that's what I say. Just not to pay the bills would be. I mean, at least that, and then I'd killer. Anything more than that, gravy, icing on the cake. The teriyaki mushrooms on the teriyaki sirloin, I just take your pick. That'd be a nice. I tell you, that'd be a great 8th anniversary gift. I looked up the typical gifts. I didn't bother looking at linens. I mean, who the hell cares about linens? That's women can look that one up, but. I did look up the typical gift, the silver. 25 years is the silver anniversary, and 50 years is the golden anniversary, and 75 years is the diamond anniversary. Well, what's the 8th anniversary? I looked it up. It said bronze and pottery. Well, I don't really have any use for pottery, unless it's some rare piece of pottery that I could sell for a lot of money to a museum, but. Bronze? I don't know. I mean, I will. And of course, once I got this bronze anniversary gift, what's the first thing that I would have to go do with it? Go out and have it bronze, right? I don't know what is a bronze gift other than an old Olympic bronze medal that its owner no longer wanted. Maybe they had to hawk it. And then I would find out how much I could hawk it for. It's because it's not that I wouldn't really want it, but I wouldn't really own it because, I've never been in the Olympics. I'm not an athlete. So, oh yeah, somebody else's bronze medal. Well, I don't know how much bronze is worth nowadays. I mean, this isn't the Bronze Age. It was several thousand years ago, so I don't know. I don't know, but it's the bronze anniversary, so this is our bronze anniversary here on the Hard Starboard Radio Network, blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. If I'm, well, let's just say I sound much more alive than I would have had I not taken that 2-hour nap, which concluded just under an hour before showtime. So I came in here and belatedly caught up on everything I'd missed over those preceding 2 hours. But that's what happens when you look at the clock before you turn out the light, and it turns out it's about an hour later than you thought it was. 11:50 p.m. is what the clock said. I'm still not sure I believe that. And then, of course, when you live far enough north to where there are really significant... And I'm not talking Alaska, all right? But when you live quite a ways up the coast, like I live 1,200 miles up the Pacific coast of North America from Mr. Gibbs, precisely 1,200 miles. If you go out of my driveway and you drive south and wind up in the driveway of Douglas V. Gibbs, 1,200 miles on the button. I know. It's like, wow, I didn't know it was that precise. So when I say 1,200 miles, I mean 1,200 miles. But when you're farther enough up the coast, when your longitude is high enough, then to where there are significant differences in the length of daylight between winter and summer. One of the drawbacks of that, if you want to call it a drawback, I'm certainly willing to live with it. But heck, I took a nap at noon. So, it's not like it was dark outside at noon. But one of the drawbacks of that, especially if you're like me, is that you tend to wake up as soon as there's the slightest bit of light outside your window. And, of course, naturally, the way everything's situated in the hard starboard bedroom, so it's on hard in this case, I'm right next to the window. And I tend to like to sleep on my right side, so I'm usually facing the window. And so when as soon as the first photon hits my closed eyelids, I go boing, and I just come awake. And I looked at the clock, and it seemed like I'd tried to doze for a while longer, and kind of, eventually, you can't get back to sleep, and you just don't have the patience to continue to try. Besides, if you try to get to sleep, you're never going to get to sleep. You can only fall asleep. You can't try to go to sleep, unless you bonk yourself on the head with a mallet or something. And so I looked at the clock. It was 5:03 a.m. So I'd barely gotten over 5 hours of sleep. How that turned out to be the case, I don't know. It doesn't always happen, but this morning it did, so 5 hours. So I got up and I came down to my broadcasting studio, and by the way, I cannot accurately say I have a new screensaver, but what I'm using for a screensaver is the Ustream feed from the International Space Station. Yeah, no kidding. International Space Station, Ustream feed. They have a camera that's pointed out a window, and you can literally see our planet moving. Well, it's really the International Space Station that's moving more so than Earth. But you can see Earth. You can see sunset, sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, sunrise, live from the International Space Station, and so that's my new screensaver. A live shot from orbit. I've always wanted to find something like that. I can never find it. Never had what do I want to put in here? Orbitalview.com, the view from Earth orbit or whatever. And I happened to stumble upon it the other day. International Space Station Ustream feed. So from the ISS, International Space Station. So that's my new, in effect, technically it's not a screensaver program, but that is in effect my new screensaver. I came in here and watched that, mesmerized for a while. Then, of course, I finished watching my first viewing of my Avengers 2 Age of Ultron download. Took about, how long has it been? Yeah, that's right. That's about right. Took about 3 weeks for it to show up on movieberry.com, and it was sold as being a low resolution or low quality, but for low quality, officially designated low quality, I was not dissatisfied with it. I came to the same conclusion that I did when I reviewed it back on May the 2nd. It's not too bad, but it's, not real good. Spectacular action, but the characterizations weren't all that great. I mean, it was really more of a... The underlying story was weak, but the overall purpose of it was to move forward the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so... I suppose it accomplished that task, but it didn't really tell that great a story. It was spectacular special effects, but the characterizations were kind of... I know I talked about this 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to 3 weeks plus. I'm not going to lapse off into discussion of Avengers 2 Age of Ultron, but in fact, I don't know why I mentioned it at all. I'm looking at the show clock here and trying to pace myself. So, at any rate, 8th anniversary, 8 years on Blog Talk Radio, 8 years on the air. 8 years on the air, man. That's something, man. That really is. 8 years on the air, over 1,300 podcasts, which means, oh, goodness gracious, I would well over 2,000 hours on the air, honing my streams of consciousness, my radio instincts, my radio voice. If multiple people are telling you that you have a great voice for radio, well, then who am I to argue? Who am I to argue? You may not like what I say, but you love the way. You may not like what I say, but in terms of the way I say it, you love it. Which reminds me of Kraft macaroni and cheese, which I didn't have time to fix for lunch. So I got the remains of all I've had today is the remains of a bag of TGI Fridays cheddar and bacon wafers, chips, whatever. That's it. So, you'll know what I'll be doing right after the podcast today. The 8th anniversary podcast of the Hard Starboard Radio Network. And as of today, I can say officially there are 8 years worth of podcasts for your downloading pleasure, your education, edification, enlightenment, and entertainment in all your life's endeavors. Perfect thing to take with you to a desert island. Not the only thing. You want to have, first of all, you want to have your Bible, and then an iPod with every podcast of Hard Starboard Radio, American Daily Review, Saturdays 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, the first 2 hours of the 3-hour Saturday afternoon extravaganza, and of course, Constitution Radio, Douglas V. Gibbs. And by the way, if you want a podcast of American Daily Review, go to blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. You have there 6.8. Let's see. No, it's probably about 6.9 years coming up, or 5.9 years coming up on 6 years, July the 2nd, of podcasts there for your downloading attention. If you want any of the 200 podcasts from Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs and our run on KCAA AM 1050, send an email to jasmius@comcast.net. Specify the date. I'll be happy to send it to you. Perfectly happy, because I'm the only one that's got them. We don't have our download page at kcaaradio.com. Obviously not there anymore. Hasn't been there for. It actually was there for quite a ways into the week following our last episode on KCAA. It hasn't been there since. And Mr. Gibbs doesn't have them. I'm the only one who does, because I have saved a copy of every broadcast I've ever been on. Every single solitary one. Going all the way back to May the 26th, 2007. I thought belatedly, too late for today's program, but I thought belatedly about, maybe I'll just play that original podcast. The first, I was only an hour then, so maybe I'll play that first original podcast, just to go down memory lane. But I didn't think of it in time. There's just too much stuff to do. I do want to make brief mention about, of course, Constitution Radio. This Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, KMET 1490am.com globally. Same place on your AM radio dial in Southern California Inland Empire area. And will Pamela Geller be on this Saturday? Beats me. Don't know. It may have just been a swing and a miss. And we're at strike two, so. But of course, there will always be the regulars: Mr. Gibbs, myself, Alex Ferguson of conservativecandidate.org. I don't know why it isn't .com, but there is the All-Star Collision Big Stories of the Week, brought to you by All-Star Collision. We do the first portion of them on American Daily Review. We finish on Constitution Radio. As befits a 3-hour program, right now on 2 venues, eventually 3 hours daily on 1 venue. All-Star Collision in the Southern California Inland Empire area. 522 Railroad Street, Corona, California is the address. You have a auto detailing desire, an auto body repair need. The Patriots of the All-Star Collision are the place you want to go. Web address allstarci.com to find out what they're all about and whatever they have going on, whatever specials they may have in the offing. Phone number 951-279-9161. All-Star Collision, the kings of wreck and roll, and they bring you the All-Star Collision and Big Stories of the Week each and every week. It continued through our hiatus and transition period from KCAA to KMET. Now we're at KMET, and we're rolling forward to greatness and financial salvation. And remember, like I say, it doesn't have to be much. I'm not. The only debt I have is my mortgage. That's it. That's the only debt I have, man. So I'm not drowning in debt. My financial position, actually, my financial position is fine. It's just the income position that sucks at the moment. And then our YouTube channels, of course, youtube.com/HardStarboardRadio, the home of the most listened to Jasmius cam footage. Let me start that again. YouTube.com/HardStarboardRadio, the home of the jazziest cam footage of the most listened to podcast of each and every week. And, of course, YouTube.com/AmericanDailyReview2, the home of the 3-hour Saturday afternoon extravaganza from each and every Saturday. Now, I was putting that together last night, and the file bogged down and didn't save, so I got to try it again tonight. Otherwise, I would have had it uploaded, and you could have already been watching it. But I'll try it again tonight. Nothing I can do about it. Technical difficulties, and just, I don't know what the issue was. Usually, I set it saving overnight, get up the next morning, and it's done. Well, not this morning. This morning, it was only 38% done. 38% saved, so I don't know what the deal with that was. I hope I didn't damage any of the files in question. Although I could always re-download the ADR podcast and the Constitution Radio podcast as well. Although that doesn't go into this video, but at any rate, I think that's just about everything. I'll tell you something else. One more thing. Let me just share one more thing with you. Oh, yeah. What am I talking about? I haven't even identified myself. I'm Jasmius. In case you were wondering. Your ruler, your benevolent despot, your fountain rabbi of conservatism, constitutionalism, Christianity, and common sense, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Guest call-in number 646-478-5068. Email address jasmius@comcast.net. And chat room, well, get in while you can, because the window is closing as far as there being space left. Or if it isn't closing, it shortly will be. The only other thing I was going to observe is I'm looking at the clock, and it's 36 minutes into the program. And when I started this 8 years ago, it used to be a 1-hour show, and I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to fill an hour? This is how far I've come. Oh, sure, opening table setting monologue went 6 minutes over, but number one, this is internet radio. Number two, it's our 8th anniversary show. We can afford to let our hair down a little bit from our rigid discipline to which you become accustomed over the preceding 8 years. Now, Kevin Williamson asks the question today at nationalreview.com, what price are we prepared to pay to keep ISIS in check? No, he said, he doesn't say defeat ISIS. He doesn't say wipe out the Islamic State. What price are we prepared just to keep them in check? Of course, it's a rhetorical question. We're not prepared to pay a damn thing. I tell you what, I don't want to go off too far down this rabbit trail. It's related, at the very least. Concentrically related, but you know how George W. Bush never defended his policies, ever? Never defended them when he was president? This is what you get. Democrats spent 8 years. Well, not 8 years, I suppose it was. Well, as far as Iraq is concerned, it was more like 6 years. But they spent 6 years bashing, lying about, demonizing Operation Iraqi Freedom. Eventually it took. Once the war The Iraq front of the war on Islamic fundamentalism passed its typical historic expiration date. You know, come about the end of 2006, and and you know, polling still indicates, you know, I mean, this is what got Barack Obama elected president. It was a big reason. You know, the fact that George W. Bush was personally vilified and demonized, and then that just dragged down the Republican Party in 2008 was an unmitigated disaster, and then you know, everything that's befallen the country since is a product of that. Well, the public is still 62 over 60. I think it was 62% last year. It hasn't changed much, so it's still over 60% of Americans approve of our abandoning Iraq, which led to the rise of the Islamic State. So that ought to tell you, that ought to answer the question of what price are we prepared to pay to even keep ISIS in check. We're not prepared to pay a damn thing. Nobody cares about keeping ISIS in check. Or let me put it this way. It's more along the lines of a wave the magic wand kind of proposition. The American people want ISIS kept in check. They just don't want us to actually have any direct hand in it. Which fits right in with the fraud that Barack Obama's trying to sell on fighting the Islamic State. What's his phrase for that? Degrade and defeat. It's a fraud. It's a phony war. It's a sitzkrieg. Joe Biden, who is inevitably Vice President of the United States, took the occasion of Memorial Day to telephone the Iraqi Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi. Oh, no, I don't speak Arabic. For the purpose of making the political equivalent of a halftime locker room speech. Biden assures Iraqi Prime Minister of U.S. support, reported ABC CCP News. When Biden assures you of U.S. support, update your life insurance policy, man, and begin quietly executing whatever your plan B is. Let's hope he has a good real estate agent. I mean, there's not going to be a whole lot of real estate left in Iraq that isn't under the control of the Islamic State. But let's not blame poor feckless Joe Biden, the terrified, rodential little man with the lingering hands and too much fondness for the word literally. Literally. The definition of which he does not seem to know. Literally. Yes, the Veep is an unserious man on this, as on all matters, but he is an unserious vice president who serves at the pleasure of an unserious... No, Barack Obama is deadly serious. He's an anti-American president. That's the thing, Barack Obama, who serves at the pleasure of an unserious... Well, actually, he doesn't serve at anyone's pleasure, at least not anymore. But what he still technically did, it was at the pleasure of an unserious people. Us. Conservatives charge that President George W. Bush had effectively won the war in Iraq and that Barack Obama subsequently lost it. And that's true. Some of Mr. Williamson's more hawkish friends omit the key fact. Barack Obama was elected for the express purpose of surrendering such gains as we had made in Iraq, the American people having judged the price of securing them too high, which is, of course, ridiculous. You've seen in the backdrop of history, the casualties we suffered in Iraq were a drop in the bucket. Come on, 4,486 combat deaths in 8 years. Want to know how many combat deaths there were on the first day of, or on D-Day, June the 6th, 1944? I think it was like 2,500. So, I mean, 2 days of casualties in the Second World War. Versus A little over twice that many over 8 years. And there's no comparison. I think the number of wounded was something like 10,000. Wounded, maimed, missing. 10,000. How many casualties do we have in 8 years in Iraq? Something like 25,000. Greatest. I mean, there's a reason why we call them the greatest. The World War II generation, the greatest generation. I think just this. You think this generation could have incurred, borne up against casualties of that magnitude? Oh, that's a good one. That's a knee slapper right there. The electorate in 2008 was what they thought, and again, against the backdrop of history, it's laughable, but what they thought was war-weary, and embarrassing as it is to admit, craven. And not only on the matter of our military campaigns. The electorate has come to take the Lyndon Johnson, Herman Goering guns for butter rhetoric literally. Isn't that right? Slow Joe. As if there's some transmutational property of politics, we could convert the material invested in the long war with Islamic supremacists into subsidies for foodstuffs, or better yet, for health insurance premiums. Senator Obama argued precisely that, and subsequent evidence suggests he just may be daft enough to believe it. You had any doubts? President John Kennedy, in his inaugural address, famously promised that the United States stood ready to pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. He didn't mean it, of course, and neither do our contemporaries when they echo that uplifting but ultimately dishonest sentiment. The question is, what price are we prepared to pay, and what burdens are we prepared to bear, if any, to keep the so-called Islamic State from completely overrunning not only Iraq, but a wide swath of the Middle East and North America? We might ask Lindsey Graham that question, since he is, for no obvious reason, running for president. He thinks he is, anyway. If Graham's performance merits a closing credit in the big 2016 picture show, it will be as rhetorical tough guy number one. For example, if I'm president of the United States and you're thinking about joining Al-Qaeda or ISIS, I'm not going to call a judge, I'm going to call a drone, and we will kill you. Instead of, I don't know, capturing them and applying them coercively for intelligence. Given the prevailing spirit of boobishness, I trust the Washington Post got that double dose of gonna correct. The Obama regime has established the precedent of assassinating American citizens abroad for thought crimes with no legal warrant, as in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki, an admittedly odious fanatic whose main crime, so far as the regime has been able to document, was blogging and gloating. Of course, Barack Obama was never held accountable for that. Imagine if a Republican president had done that, ladies and gentlemen. But Graham takes things a step further. Al-Awlaki was killed in Yemen, but Graham apparently is ready to dispatch drones anywhere and everywhere that jihad-infected thought crime occurs. If we take Graham at his word, then if you happen to be thinking the unthinkable at the Starbucks on Ingalls Place in Seneca, South Carolina, President Graham is ready to send a Hellfire missile to your location. Better order a particularly large muffin that morning. He's not going to call a judge, he says. In some quarters, that is received as something other than horror. Personally, I don't really care all that much, but it does set a precedent in other ways. That's why I keep looking out my window periodically here at Hart Starboard Galactic Headquarters. But of course, Lindsey Graham almost certainly is not going to be President of the United States, the sole persuasive argument for electing him being that he is a confirmed bachelor, and that there would therefore be no First Lady, which would be, by the way, that would make him the first president since Grover Cleveland to enter, or to be elected president and enter the White House as a bachelor. Of course, Grover Cleveland went on to get married in the White House, and he and his bride, who was 28 years younger than he was, incidentally, their first kid was a daughter named Ruth, and hence the candy bar name Baby Ruth. That's where that came from. Yes, there is a little history in the show each and every afternoon. And the only other bachelor before Grover Cleveland was James Buchanan in 1856. And he never did get married. His sister played White House hostess, and you may kind of wonder, but was James Buchanan going up the down escalator, so to speak, putting from the rough? I mean, you hear the rumors, the claims that Abraham Lincoln might have been bisexual. I don't know why anybody would speculate about the sexuality of historical figures, but I've never bought that. I mean, if Abraham Lincoln could get it, have you ever seen a picture of Mary Todd Lincoln? If Abraham Lincoln could get it up for that, yeah, I think he could get it up for just about any woman. So I mean, that speaks to his virility, not his not any sexual confusion on his part. But James Buchanan, well, that might be a more reasonable speculation. But you never hear that, do you? Because of course he was a Democrat, so you don't hear speculations of such a puerile and unsafe nature about Democrats. Only Republicans, and of course Abraham Lincoln, first Republican president. But I digress. If Lindsey Graham was elected president, which he won't be, there would therefore be no First Lady, which would be a welcome reprieve from the scolding and grievance mongering to which we've become accustomed in recent years. At the other end of the spectrum, Republican spectrum, is Senator Rand Paul's let's you and him fight strategy, promising the Kurds an independent nation if the Peshmerga will do the heavy lifting in the battle against the Islamic State. Oh boy. Elizabeth Warren, he's got Hillary Rodham Clinton, but she's not going to be the nominee. For her part, argued in February that the way to fight the Islamic State was with air power from the United States and its allies and soldiers from the region, and particularly from Iraq. Yeah, yeah. How's that going? I mean, they outnumber the Islamic State in Ramadi 40-1, and guess who fled from whom? That would be a neat trick to pull off if, come January 2017, there were no soldiers from Iraq and effectively no Iraq, an outcome that does not at this moment seem impossible, seems quite likely, actually. The candidates are incoherent and their strategies are implausible because they are seeking the support of an electorate with incoherent demands, who demand victory, if they think about victory at all, at an implausibly low price. Haider al-Abadi may go looking for insight in foreign policy, but he should re-up his subscription to Sotheby's International Realty, too. Realty. If he doesn't already have a retirement chalet secured. No sane man bets his head, literally, on the assurances of Joe Biden or just about anybody else in the 2016 Republican presidential field. Let's see. Now, Barack Obama gave what Robert Trzynski calls an odd Memorial Day message, but if you know Barack Hussein Obama, you know that nothing he ever says is odd coming from his lights. I mean, it's any kind of communication, it's always about context. And we know the context of Barack Obama's speeches now, don't we? So, Barack Obama's Memorial Day speech at Arlington National Cemetery, to Mr. Trzynski anyway, contained an odd and disturbing message. Well, all his messages are disturbing, but they're not odd, because anybody who knows Barack Obama knows how disturbing the American dictator is. Obama proclaimed this year's ceremony to be especially meaningful because today is the first Memorial Day in 14 years that the United States is not engaged in a major ground war. How so? It is the first since our war in Afghanistan came to an end. Except, of course, it hasn't. Certainly nobody told the Taliban, or now the Islamic State, which is steadily taking over Afghanistan, that the war came to an end. I hope no one will try to tell that to our Afghan allies either, since we're depending on them to keep fighting after we've retreated, quit, surrendered. And we know how that's going to turn out. And as Obama admits later on, the war isn't over for the 10,000 U.S. troops that remain for a while on a mission to train Afghan soldiers and who are still taking casualties. More to the point, what's odd about Obama's message, according to Mr. Trzynski, is that it sounds almost triumphalist. See what I mean about this speech not being odd by Obama's lights? It is offered up as if he is proclaiming a new era of peace, while the peace our servicemen gave their lives to achieve is actually crumbling at an accelerating pace, which is what happens when you quit wars rather than winning them. Certainly this must be something of a bitter Memorial Day for a great many of the troops who served in Iraq. The crucial victory in that war was the battle for Anbar province and its capital of Ramadi in 2007. A historic victory and one of the most successful counterinsurgency campaigns ever fought. So it must be a tough moment for veterans of that campaign to see ISIS hoisting its black flag over Ramadi. There are good men who gave their lives or left behind an arm or a leg to keep Islamic terrorists from establishing a home base in Iraq. Having achieved that victory, they then had to watch it as it was all thrown away. Now we can argue how much of this was the fault of a regime that blew ISIS off as junior varsity while it began to take over the Sunni provinces of Iraq. Actually, no, there's no argument about that. It was all Barack Obama's fault. A regime which to this day dismisses the loss of Ramadi as a minor setback and insists that its strategy in Iraq is still working. You know, Chip Diller explanation. All is well! All is well! Which sometimes makes it seem as if Baghdad Bob came to the U.S. and got hired as the new White House spokesman. But whatever this regime's role, it is disturbing to see Barack Obama touting the peace that we are supposedly enjoying after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have, quote, come to an end, close quote. And that's an appropriately passive expression since Obama can't say that we won those wars because, of course, that was never his point and that wasn't what he was elected to do. And really, if the American people had wanted to win those wars, they wouldn't have elected Barack Obama. Because he specifically said, he was gonna end our participation in those wars. He didn't say he was gonna win. That's one thing about which he was perfectly transparent. And like I said earlier in the hour, over 60% of the American people are still on board with that. They want our enemies defeated. They just don't want to have to fight them. And Barack Obama has sold them on this wave the magic wand foreign policy. It's one thing to celebrate the end of fighting when the war has been won on terms that secure a lasting peace. In that case, you were paying tribute to what our troops achieved when they risked their lives to protect us. But to applaud the fact that our men and women are out of the fight and standing on the sidelines while the war is still raging, and we've lost most of the strategic gains that they won. Most? All of them. Try all of them, Mr. Trzynski. Seems to imply that their deaths were unnecessary after all. They died for nothing, in other words. 4,486 meaningless, worthless deaths. They weren't when Barack Obama took office, but he turned them into that over the past 6.5 years. They gave their lives for a strategic goal the current regime finds so unimportant it's not willing to take decisive action to defend it. But then it wasn't elected to do that. Was it? Was he? The worst part is that Barack Obama seems oblivious, so he's not oblivious, Mr. Trzynski, trust me, to the likelihood that this special Memorial Day with no U.S. ground war will be a short-lived hiatus. That the spiraling situation in Iraq, as well as the predictable relapse in Afghanistan once we've drawn down to an embassy presence by the end of next year, will drag us back in. Except we won't have to go as far. We won't have to go halfway around the world. We'll be fighting right here on our own soil. Remember the ISIS camps right across the Mexican border? ISIS pouring into our country? Now they're going to be bringing in nukes if they haven't been already? Oh, we will be fighting the Islamic State again, but it's not going to be over there. It's going to be right here. What should worry us is the time frame Obama cites since the last time we didn't have a ground war. 14 years. What was happening 14 years ago? Yep. That's right. We were headed into the summer of 2001, blissfully unprepared, and our leaders were already ignoring an Islamic fundamentalist state that provided a base of operations for a jihadist terror group that had launched attacks on U.S. targets and was vowing bigger operations. Returning to those pre-9/11 conditions is hardly something to celebrate. Remember when, I'll say it again, remember after 9/11 and people said, well, 9/11 changed everything. And even at the time I said, want to bet? That ain't going to last for long. And it didn't. Lasted longer than I thought it would, but eventually it didn't. We went back to 9/10. We always do. It's one of the character defects of the American people. The stupidity of the American people. Thinking that we can just, we get caught with our pants down and we fight back and we win a war, and then what do we immediately do? We disband everything. Disarm, demobilize, and have to do the same damn thing all over again. It's not that anyone should enjoy the idea of sending U.S. ground troops back into harm's way again. We would all be better off if the regime had exercised greater caution and vigor in protecting the gains our troops had already won. What's tragic is that the regime is so eager to proclaim wars are over just because we walked away from them for a while. And that we'll probably have to go back in again, or except that when we do, it'll be here, not over there, and pay for, we can only pray that we would get the chance to get back to the point where we would be paying for the same real estate twice. We'll be right back. Hi, how are you? On the 8th anniversary edition of the Hard Starboard Radio Network at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. Yeah, 8 years. Who'd have thunk it? And who much or knows how much longer this crazy train will continue. Hopefully it'll... The only thing that will end it is the going to weekdays, going national, hitting the big time of Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs. That would be a reason to curtail the Hard Starboard Radio Network. Until that point is reached, we will continue. Now, I am not one to tilt at windmills, ladies and gentlemen. I never have been. I mean, there are many things that are common sense that we should do that are politically impossible. The Overton window doesn't stretch that much, and it's nowhere near there. And here is another example of that. Now, anybody who is looking at the condition of, say, Africa in the 1920s, 1930s, let's just say, versus its condition almost 100 years later, aka now, would conclude, I mean, let's say the proverbial alien traveler. And they come to Earth and they spend some time studying humanity and human civilization and the conflicts and so on and so forth. I mean, heck, Optimus Prime vacuumed up the entire internet in a blink. You know, remember in the first live-action Transformers movie, Optimus Prime, remember he said to Sam Witwicky and Michaela, whatever her last name was, you know, played by Megan Fox. Remember what he said? It has a lot of information, but it isn't particularly deep, or words to that effect. And that pretty much captures the internet, I think you could say. But now let's say this alien visitor learns enough about our civilization and our history to be able to draw these conclusions, to make these judgments. If you're that alien visitor, you would conclude that Africa was better off 80 or 90 years ago under Western colonialism than it is today. In fact, it's not arguable. It's a no-brainer. It's the self-evident truth. And yet, try selling that notion that Africa needs to be put back, and not just Africa, Middle East, and et cetera, but excuse me. Sorry, didn't get to the cough button in time, but this was a sneeze, and I don't have a sneeze button, so technically I can cover myself that way. But let's say, or try selling that notion today, that Africa will be better off back under European, Western colonial rule. That's why that argument doesn't get made. That's why you don't even think about it typically. But it's always been my assertion that, hey, you look at the state. I mean, Africa wasn't a morass of war and filth and pestilence and upheaval and genocide and starvation, and it wasn't that way 80 or 90 years ago. Much better run continent under Western colonialism than it is now. It's not arguable, but it's an argument that is so far outside the Overton window. They're not even in the same universe. Totally different quantum history. Well, here's a piece. Robert Kaplan at foreignpolicy.com. Very fascinating piece. Look, it's entitled The Ruins of Empire in the Middle East. Imperialism may have fallen out of fashion a long time ago, but history shows that the only other option is the kind of chaos we see today. I did say this is self-evident. So yes, here's Robert Kaplan echoing me. Jasmy's echo syndrome strikes again. Although imperialism is now held in disrepute, empire has been the default means of governance for most of recorded history, and the collapse of empires have always been messy affairs, whether in China and India from antiquity through the early 20th century or in Europe following World War I. And even, well, I would say following World War II, really. Now, the meltdown we see in the Arab world today with chaos in parts of North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Levant parts is really about the final end of imperialism. The Islamic State's capture of Palmyra, an ancient caravan city and one of the most visually stunning archaeological sites in the Near East, well, you better get whatever pictures you can, because it ain't going to be stunning. It's not going to be visually stunning for long after ISIS gets through with it. But that only punctuates this point. Palmyra represents how the region historically has been determined by trade routes rather than fixed borders. Its seizure by the barbarians only manifests how the world is returning to that fluid reality. It's actually 3 imperial systems whose collapse we are now witnessing in the Middle East. Oh, isn't it? Here's an interesting... Maybe I'll mention this one tomorrow. Headline, great, now China's got multiple nuclear warhead missiles. Well, yeah. And your point is? Oh, here's the next one down from that. China's military blueprint. Bigger Navy, bigger global role. I might be blogging about that at politicalpistachio.com. In fact, I do think I have it in the hopper to put up a post about that after the show today. Anyway, the meltdown we see in the Arab... Oh, okay. Wrong paragraph. It is actually 3 imperial systems whose collapse we are now witnessing in the Middle East. First, Middle East chaos demonstrates that the region has still not found a solution to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. For hundreds of years, Sunnis and Shiites, Arabs and Jews, Muslims and Christians in Greater Syria and Mesopotamia had few territorial disputes. All fell under the rule of an imperial sovereign in Istanbul who protected them from each other. That system collapsed in 1918, unleashing the demon of national, ethnic, and sectarian disputes over who controls which territory at what border precisely. Second, the implosion of Iraq in the wake of the implosion of Iraq in the wake of Barack Obama's abandonment of Iraq. The implosion of Syria in the wake of the Arab Spring and the rise of the Islamic State has brought to an end the borders erected by European imperialism, British and French, in the Levant. Third, the demonstrably hands-off approach to these developments by Barack Obama manifests the end of America's great power role in organizing and stabilizing the region, and I would argue the period, planet-wide. And the United States, remember, since the end of World War II, has been a world empire in all but name. Nobody, perhaps, makes this uncomfortable point more comprehensively than Oxford historian John Darwin in his 2007 book, After Tamerlane, The Rise and Fall of Global Empires, 1400 to 2000. Now, it's not just imperial forces that have declined and left chaos in their wake. The fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and the reduction of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria to that of an embattled statelet has ended the era of post-colonial strongmen, whose rule was organically connected to the legacy of imperialism. After all, those dictators ruled according to the borders erected by the Europeans. And because those imperial borders did not often configure with ethnic or sectarian ones, those dictatorial regimes required secular identities in order to span communal divides. All this has been brutally swept away. Alas, the so-called Arab Spring has not been about the birth of freedom, but about the collapse of central authority. which says nothing about the readiness of these states, artificial and otherwise, for the rigors of self-governance. Among the states affected by the current upset, two kinds have been discernible. First, there are the age-old clusters of civilization. These are places that have been states in one form or another going back as far as antiquity, and thus have evolved sturdy forms of secular identity that have risen above ethnicity and religious sect, such as Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. All are the most striking in this category. If one looks at a map of Roman sites along the North African coast, one will see that the map is crowded with settlements where these countries are located, and relatively absent of settlements in the vast stretches in between of Algeria and Libya. In other words, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt are historically definable. Whatever tumult and regime changes that they have experienced in the course of the Arab Spring, their identities as states have never been in question. And so, the issues in these countries have been about who rules and what kind of government there should be, not about whether or not a state or central government is even possible. The second group of Middle Eastern states is even more unstable. These take the form of vague geographical expressions, and they are places with much weak identities. And in fact, many have identities that were invented by European imperialists. Libya, Syria, and Iraq fall most prominently into this category. Because identity in these cases was fragile, the most suffocating forms of authoritarianism were required to merely hold these states together. This is the root cause for the extreme nature of the Gaddafi, Assad, and Hussein regimes, which practiced levels of repression far more severe than those of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt and Zayn al-Abidine Ben Ali in Tunisia. Algeria, also an artificial state, essentially invented by the French, has experienced remote and sterile authoritarian rule and now faces an uncertain transition given the declining health of its ruler, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who has been in power since 1999. Jordan, too, is a vague geographical expression, but has enjoyed moderate governance through the genius of its ruling Hashemites. And remember, Jordan was supposed to be the Palestinian state once upon a time, and then the Hashemites were imported to rule it. So you could say that if anybody screwed the Palestinians, assuming that was even an ethnicity, which it isn't, it was not the Jews, ladies and gentlemen. But Jordan has, some allege, enjoyed moderate governance through the genius of its ruling Hashemites and the overwhelming economic and security support this small country has received from the United States and Israel. Yemen may also be an age-old cluster of civilization, but one always divided among many different kingdoms due to its rugged topography, thus ruling the territory as one unit has always been nearly impossible. Only suffocating totalitarian regimes could control these artificial countries formed from vague geographical expressions. When these regimes collapsed, they left behind an utter void. For between the regime at the top and the tribe and extended family at the bottom, all intermediary forms of social and political organization were eviscerated long before by such regimes. Totalitarianism is the only answer to the end of Western imperialism in these artificial states, and totalitarianism's collapse is now the root cause of Middle East chaos. Overlaying this meltdown of vague geographical expressions and the less severe weakening of age-old clusters of civilization has been the rise of indigenous regional powers such as Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Iran is a great old world civilization on one hand and a ruthless and radicalized sub-state on the other. This is what accounts for its dynamic effectiveness around the region. The Persian Empire has been based in one form or another on the Iranian plateau since antiquity. Thus, rather than face political identity problems like the Arabs, Iranians are blessed with a cultural self-certainty comparable to that of the Indians and the Chinese. At the same time, however, the narrow assemblage of radical mullahs running the government of Tehran represents a sub-state akin to jihadi groups or jihadist groups like the Islamic State, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and the former Mahdi army. Thus, Iran is able to cooperate with unconventional flair. Iran has mastered its nuclear fuel cycle, trained radical and militarized proxy forces in the Levant, and brilliantly conducted negotiations with its principal, well, now it's its principal ally, the United States. Thus does Iran partially inherit the void left by the disappearance of Ottoman, European, and American empires. Of course, that latter empire, that was voluntary. That was by choice, not by circumstance. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The European empires, in effect, collapsed. Ours didn't collapse. We chose to abandon it. Never forget that 62 million numbnuts who voted to elect and re-elect Barack Hussein Obama. Whereas Iran is the Shiite node of power in the newly sectarian Middle East, Saudi Arabia is the Sunni node. Saudi Arabia, compared to Iran, is the artificial creation of a single extended family. The country the Saudi family governs does not territorially configure with the Arabian Peninsula to the extent that Iran configures with the Iranian plateau. Nevertheless, the House of Saud has impressively navigated its way over the decades through immense social transformation. Really? You mean they were even worse? At home, and a tumultuous security violation or habit, a tumultuous security situation abroad. And the recent high-level personnel changes engineered by the new king, Salman, include the replacement of the crown prince and foreign minister, indicates the absolute determination of this dynasty to readjust its policies in order not to let Iran dominate the region. Well, too late for that. Saudi Arabia's recent bombing campaign against Iran-backed Houthi tribesmen in Yemen and Riyadh's renewed intensification of support for anti-Iranian Syrian rebels, in other words, the Islamic State, also helped by Turkey and Qatar, is a reaction to what Riyadh sees as an impending American-Iranian nuclear accord, an impending American-Iranian alliance until Iran destroys us. Indeed, the Saudis are already factoring into their calculations the strong possibility of such a deal, and thus the bombing in Yemen and recent pressure on the pro-Iranian Assad regime in Syria represent, ahead of the actual fact, the post-nuclear accord Middle East. That accord, if it indeed happens, and it will, though limited to nuclear issues, only nuclear issues, will be viewed with some justification as the beginning of a more general American-Iranian alliance. In regional terms, that is, one declining imperial power coming to terms with a rising... It's not coming to terms. We are choosing our decline. We voted for our decline. It wasn't inflicted upon us by outside circumstances, our enemies. To contain a post-accord Iran, the United States, well, we're not going to contain post-accord Iran. So, if post-accord Iran is going to be contained, and it isn't, the only ones who will be attempting to do it will be Saudi Arabia, and maybe Egypt and Turkey as well. Egypt's security services under de facto military strongman Abdel Fattah el-Sisi are already quietly allied with the Israeli security services in Gaza, Sinai, and elsewhere. And by the way, do you ever think you'd see the day? A strong Egypt is necessary, democratic or not, as a regional anti-Iran power, looking for the right word there, since the author here, Mr. Kaplan, doesn't provide it, to bolster Saudi Arabia, while Turkey under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not normally viewed as well, it isn't. It's an anti-American country. That's why Barack Obama likes Erdogan so much, remember, if you will recall. A strong Turkey in and of itself also helps balance against Iranian power, but here again, one enemy balanced against another enemy, it doesn't do us any good. The jostling among these geographically and historically fortunate powers for regional dominance will define the new post-imperial order, in other words, an all-out regional nuclear war. If there is a new American president in 2017, he or she may seek to reinstate Western imperial influence. Well, in this case it would be he, in that case. Calling it by another name, of course, but he will be constrained by the very collapse of central authority across the Middle East that began with the fall of Saddam Hussein and continued through the post-Arab Spring years. Regrettably true. Strong Arab dictatorships across the region were convenient to American interests since they provided a single address in each country for America to go to in the event of regional crises. But now there is much less of that. In several countries there is simply no one in charge to whom we can bring our concerns. Chaos is not only a security and humanitarian problem, but a severe impediment to American power projection. Thus, the near-term and perhaps middle-term future of the Middle East will likely be grim. Oh, you think? The Sunni Islamic State will now fight Iran's Shiite militias, just as Saddam's Sunni Iraq fought Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's Shiite Iran in the 1980-88 Iran-Iraq War. That war, going on as long as it did, represented in part the deliberate decision of the Reagan administration not to intervene. Another example of weak imperial authority, though a successful one, since it allowed Reagan to concentrate on Europe and help win the Cold War. Back then, it was states at war. Imperialism bestowed order, however retrograde it may have been. The challenge now is less to establish democracy than to re-establish order. For without order, there is no freedom for anyone, but then, since when does freedom have anything to do with it? Yeah, I can tell that page is non-responsive. Does it have to remain that way? No, it does not have to remain that way. Yay! Here's a question, and it's a very salient question. All my questions are salient. That's why I am the producer of the All-Star Collision Big Stories of the Week segment on Constitution Radio, and the stack of, well, the pile of awesomeness here on the Hard Starboard Radio Network. Not stack of stuff. That's, I'm sure Rush Limbaugh copyrighted that a long time ago. But we do need to take a look, building toward the climax today. The disasters at home and abroad. Why national security Republicans lost the Patriot Act debate? Because, of course, the Patriot Act is dead. If anybody thinks that you're going to resurrect the Patriot Act in one day, and of course, that's a reference to this next Sunday, when the Senate comes back from its Memorial Day break. Rand Paul's already saying, well, Patriot Act's dead. I'm not going to let it come for a vote. Probably couldn't get 60 votes anyway. But did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that the NSA doesn't even know your name? You probably don't. Well, our audience is the most intelligent audience in the Alpha Quadrant, so you all know this, but we're talking about the libs and nibs here, the low information voters. They probably don't know that. It's amazing how little the public has learned about, or from the debate the national security right has lost. Not is losing, but has lost over the National Security Agency's metadata program. This is Andy McCarthy. Last Saturday. NationalReview.com. The information the NSA has collected in bulk from telecommunications service providers does not include the names of telephone subscribers. They don't know who you are. It does not include addresses. They don't know where you are. Most people still don't know this, which reflects the power of the domestic spying canard peddled by Rand Paul's anti-government extremists and baby boom lefties who apparently still think it's 1974. The latter camp includes a 3-judge panel of the Second Circuit Federal Appeals Court in New York, whose ruling that the NSA program is illegal, which it isn't. We talked about this on Hard Starboard Radio, I think it was last week. Begins with this astonishing claim, quote, "In the early 70s, in a climate not altogether unlike today's, the intelligence gathering and surveillance activities of the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA came under public scrutiny." Seriously? A program that creates a database that does not contain personal identifying information and that can be accessed only under a statutory process overseen by a special court that Congress established precisely in response to the 70 spy scandals is reminiscent of the black bag tactics that marked those scandals. As has been discussed before, and as National Review's editors have acknowledged, there is a perfectly reasonable argument that the NSA program is illegal. Not that it is unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court has long held that data about phone calls, as opposed to the content of the calls, have no Fourth Amendment protection. We talked about that last week on Hard Starboard Radio. Last Friday, I think. But that it may violate the governing statute, Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That is, one could conclude that in permitting the NSA to collect millions of phone records, the aforementioned special court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA court, unreasonably stretched the governing statute's concept of what records count as relevant to terrorism investigations. Nevertheless, the Nixon-era domestic spying was an outrage, one that padded the impeachment charges against Nixon and caused many worthy terrorism cases to be dropped, because it was targeted surveillance, including break-ins and thefts, conducted against governing law and without judicial warrant. The NSA program is anonymous surveillance sought pursuant to governing law and permitted by judicial warrant. For what it's worth, we think highly of Jerry Lynch, the judge who wrote the main second court opinion, or at least Andy McCarthy does. Judge Lynch was McCarthy's superior as criminal division chief at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan in the early 90s. But the analogy of the NSA program to early 70s intelligence gathering is a distortion, not an argument. In point of fact, there is more personally identifying information about American citizens in the phone book than in the NSA program. Have you seen phone directories lately? It's not like the old days where, as a prosecutor, McCarthy kept them stacked next to his desk and often flipped through them. Yes, without a search warrant. Don't tell Senator Paul. For years now, they've been online. See, for example, whitepages.com. Find neighbors, distant relatives, or anyone in the country, the site brags, just by typing in the name or a zip code. It was when McCarthy was in college, if distant memory serves, that students were asked to submit exams not under their names, but under social security numbers, or student identification numbers. The idea was that the professor could not discriminate against you if he or she did not know whose paper was being graded. To them, you were just a number, and grading was a dry exercise of comparing answers to questions. Somehow, the same kind of anonymity that was impersonal and desirable in the context of exam scoring has, in the context of impersonal surveillance, been warped into a deeply intrusive invasion of personal privacy. This can't happen with the NSA program. It is nothing more than a bank of numbers. A huge bank, to be sure, just as the online telephone directories are huge databases. All the NSA program can tell the government, though, is if a number called or was called by another number, at what time, and for how long. It cannot tell them that you called another number. To figure that out, they need to take other legally regulated steps extraneous to the program. It is an absurd notion, but it does not seem absurd to most Americans because the domestic spying fiction has not been effectively rebutted. Though he often chooses to be toxic and divisive, Barack Obama is a gifted speaker. Well, it's debatable. Think of the good that might have been done by one simple, unapologetic speech that explained the lengths to which the NSA has gone not to violate the privacy of Americans. Or maybe not. The domestic spying fears have a resonance that they would not otherwise have because the Obama regime abuses its powers. It has an undeniable track record of using the IRS, the Justice Department, and the Commissariat of Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up, and other federal agencies to pursue political opponents. While serving as Obama's Commissar of State, Hillary Clinton, even threatened to use old-fashioned techniques of peer pressure and shaming in order to suppress constitutionally protected speech disfavored by the regime. The public does not trust this government to refrain from abusing its powers. If you tell people there are no known cases of the NSA using the metadata program to spy on Americans, they understandably assume that such cases simply haven't come to light yet. Not that they haven't happened. Now, there is a strong counter case to be made. Rand Paul is laughably wrong when he insists the NSA program violates the Fourth Amendment. I talked about this again last Friday on Hard Starboard Radio Network. Something even the Second Circuit did not claim. Like communists, Senator Paul likes to make up his constitution as he goes along. Communists claim the document is organic, so at least they are honest about the fact that they are changing it, not putting on constitutionalist airs as Rand Paul does. Yet the NSA's program advocates the NSA program's advocates have failed to offer a compelling defense. We have fallen into the trap of arguing the case on the opposition's terms. They claim that the program has not stopped a single terrorist attack. Program advocates countered that it has, but this is not only hard to prove, it's beside the point. First, intelligence doesn't work that way. It is a mosaic drawing on several sources, and it is rare that one piece of it completes the picture. More important, the principal purpose of the program is not to thwart individual attacks, but to map terror cells and uncover their support networks. Consequently, the program could be quite valuable even if it never stopped a single terrorist attack, specifically and directly. That is vital at a time when the jihadist threat is intensifying, but gaps in our intelligence collection are widening because of wrong-headed Obama policies, like the decrease in interrogations of captured terrorists and the discouragement of focus by our intelligence analysts on jihadist ideology. Advocates have also been counterproductively guarded in explaining why they need a full data set. Namely, we can infer, so they can run algorithms against it, based on known terrorist communication patterns, and thus discover latent terrorist communications. If this were better understood, most Americans would no more object to the anonymous storage of their phone numbers' records, which cannot be further accessed without judicial supervision, than they do to the government's possession of phone books that list their names and addresses, which are regularly accessed with no judicial supervision. Almost all of us would like to help the government identify and stop terrorists, especially if there is no risk to ourselves in doing so. The reluctance to talk openly about intelligence methods is understandable. Whatever the government tells the public, it perforce tells the terrorists. But it's not like transcontinental jihadist networks have an option to cease communicating just because they know our government is watching. What does the NSA gain by preserving the secrets of its methodology if the cost is losing the program? With the clock running down on a June 1st deadline when the Patriot Act provision that authorizes the NSA program is set to expire, and it will expire, a week from today, it'll be all gone, a week from yesterday, it'll be a distant memory, never recoverable, until, of course, after the next devastating, this time Islamic State nuclear attack on our soil. And who knows what that's going to transform the country into, anyway. The options, in any case, are not good. Congressional advocates of the metadata program want it reauthorized, but they've lost the debate, and the prospects for a quick turnaround, absent the aforementioned devastating sequel to 9/11, are zip, zero, nada, bupkis, nil. The compromised USA Freedom Act, overwhelmingly approved in the House, will effectively dismantle the program because it leaves the records in the possession of the telecoms and does not require that they be preserved for any length of time. But some telecoms will preserve records, which is better than nothing, and although the USA Freedom Act leaves much to be desired, accepting it would pave the way for approval of other significant Patriot Act provisions that would otherwise expire. The FBI is justifiably concerned that the authorities contained in these provisions, which are uncontroversial, could be lost in the ongoing standoff, which is what Rand Paul is deliberately trying to do. The best thing that could happen in this bleak scenario would be a brief extension that would enable program advocates to do better than the feeble job they've done to date defending the program. In the alternative, it is nearing time to hold our noses, accept the USA Freedom Act, and get cracking on a compelling political and legal argument to restore the program, one that can change minds in Congress and be signed by the next president, if there is one. The depiction of national security agents who are trying to protect American lives as 70s-style rogues tearing the Constitution to bits, and it's not like there's any of it that Barack Obama hasn't already torn to bits, is a smear. But a smear is something, and something always beats nothing. The metadata debate is not over, but this battle is. It's time to accept defeat gracefully, get as much as we still can for national defense, resolve to do better in the next round, and hope and pray to God that the enemy doesn't hit us between now and then. And so it should come as no surprise that things are starting to collapse, abroad and at home. Professor Victor Davis Hanson today at nationalreview.com. We all sense it, even as we bicker over who caused it and why. ISIS took Ramadi last week. That city was once a bastion to the brave Americans who surged to save it in 2007 and 2008. ISIS, once known at the White House as the JVs, the junior varsity, were certainly on the run right into the middle of that strategically important city. On a smaller scale, ISIS is doing to the surge cities of Iraq what Hitler did to his neighbors between 1939 and 1941. and what Putin is perhaps doing now on the periphery of Russia. In Ramadi, ISIS will soon do its accustomed thing of beheading and burning alive its captives, seeking some new macabre twist to sustain its internet video audience. And we in the West trample the First Amendment and jail a video maker for posting a supposedly insensitive film about Islam. In contrast, jihadists post snuff movies of burnings and beheadings to global audiences. We argue not about doing anything or saving anybody, but about whether it is inappropriate to call the macabre killers jihadists. When these 7th century psychopaths tire of warring on people, and they never do, they turn to attacking stone, seeking to ensure there is not a vestige left of the Middle East's once glorious antiquities. I assume the ancient Sassanid and Roman imperial site at Palmyra will soon be looted and smashed. What is unique about American foreign policy today is not just that it is rudderless. No, and it's not rudderless. It's deliberately anti-American. But how quickly and completely the 70-year post-war order seems to have disintegrated, and how little interest the American people take in the collapse, thanks to the regime's apparent redeeming message, which translates, it's their misfortune, it's not ours. Yet. As long as we are not involved at the center of foreign affairs and there is no perceptible short-term danger to our short-term, and there is a short-term danger actually, to our security, few seem to care much that Western North Africa is a no-man's land and a graveyard. Remember the Ebola epidemic? You haven't heard much about that lately, have you? Hillary Clinton's lead from behind created a replay of Somalia and Libya. The problem with Turkey's Recep Erdogan is not that he is no longer Obama's special friend, no, actually he is, but that he was ever considered a friend at all as he pressed forward with his plan to destroy Turkish democracy in the long march to theocracy. There was never much American goodwill for the often duplicitous Gulf monarchies, so the general public does not seem to be worried that they are now spurned allies. That estrangement has became possible because of growing U.S. self-sufficiency in oil and gas, thanks to fracking, which Obama, of course, opposed with every ounce of his demi-divine strength. Still, let us hope the Gulf states remain neutral rather than becoming enemies, given their financial clout and the availability of Pakistani bombs for Sunni petrodollars. Meanwhile, the Obama regime has it in for Israel. Why? No, we know why. It's because Barack Obama's a Jew hater. He's anti-Semitic. We know why. And because he's pro-jihadist. Given that the Jewish state is the only democratic and liberal society, classical liberal, society in the Middle East, perhaps it resembles the United States too closely and thus earns the reflected hyper-criticism that so many leftists cultivate of their own civilization. Theocratic Iran has won more sympathy from the Obama regime. No neutral observer believes that the current policy of lifting sanctions and conducting negotiations will not lead to an Iranian nuclear arsenal, assuming they don't already have one, of course. Always got to throw in that caveat. It is hoped only that this will be unveiled on the watch of some other president, undoubtedly a Republican, just like 9/11 happened after the Democrat president that set up their rise had safely left office. And of course, that president, a Republican, will be castigated as a warmonger if he's forced to preempt its rollout, which he doesn't have the capability to do. Barack Obama's ensuring that. The current American foreign policy toward Iran is, well, actually, it's not baffling at all once you understand Barack Obama's motives. Does Obama see the theocracy as a valuable counterweight to the Sunni monarchies? Yes, he does! Is it more authentic in the revolutionary sense than the geriatric hereditary kingdoms in the Gulf? Yes, it is! Or is the inexplicable it's not inexplicable, Professor. Policy simply a matter of John Kerry's gambit for a Nobel Peace Prize or some sort of Obama legacy in the 11th hour, a retake of pulling all U.S. peacekeepers home from a once quiet Iraq so that Obama could claim he had ended the war there. Hillary Clinton has been talking up her successful 10 years Commissar of State, but mysteriously she has never specified exactly where, when, or how her talent shone. About what is she proud? Reset with Russia? The Asian pivot to discourage Chinese bellicosity? The critical preliminary preparations for talks with Iran? The Libyan misadventure? Or perhaps we missed a new initiative to discourage North Korean aggression? Some new underappreciated affinity with Israel and the Gulf monarchies? The touting of ISIS thanks to Hillary's plans? Shoring up free market democracies in Latin America? What free market democracies in Latin America? Approving a model of transparency as commissar? Creating a brilliant new private-public strategy by combining the works of the State Commissariat, the Clinton Foundation, and Bill's lecturing, as evidenced by the Haitian Renaissance and nation-building in Kazakhstan. And I think we got to leave off there because, that's right. We're down to under a minute. So we will transition this discussion to the Hump Day edition of the Hard Starboard Radio Network. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. That's 22 hours, 2 minutes, and 16, 15, 14, 13, etc. seconds. So we will be back then, blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. Thank you for joining us on our 8th anniversary program. And for wishing us a happy anniversary, and we will start on 8 years plus 1 day tomorrow, so join us then. Have a great evening in the meantime. Be careful out there.